On a January evening in 1933, a test audience in San Bernardino, California, watched a version of King Kong that no paying audience would ever see. In it, the sailors pursuing Kong are shaken off a log bridge and fall into a ravine. They survive the fall. What happens next is the reason you have never seen it. Out of the cracks and pools at the bottom of the pit come the ravine's inhabitants, giant spiders, crabs, lizards, something like an octopus, and the men are eaten alive, one by one, on screen. Within weeks, the sequence was gone. The film's own producer ordered it out. It was never archived, never reused, and in more than 90 years of searching by studios, collectors, historians, and at least one Oscar-winning director, not a single frame of it has ever been found. This is the story of the most famous piece of lost footage in Hollywood history, the censors who cut what remained, and the 18-inch puppet that terrified the world. Number 1. The monster that saved a studio. In 1933, at the lowest point of the Great Depression, RKO Radio Pictures was in receivership, effectively bankrupt, operating under court protection. Into that situation, producer Marion C. Cooper and director Ernest Schoedsack delivered a film unlike anything audiences had seen. A giant ape, animated frame by Willis O'Brien, fighting dinosaurs on a fog-bound island and dying on top of the tallest building in the world, a building that had itself only opened 2 years earlier. King Kong premiered in New York in March 1933, and by the accounts of the day, broke attendance records in the middle of a banking crisis, with the reported box office helping to pull RKO back from the edge. It made a star of Fay Wray. It effectively invented the American monster movie, and it did all of it with techniques most of the audience could not begin to explain. But the version those first New York audiences saw was already shorter than the film Cooper had screened 2 months earlier in California. Something had been taken out, and unlike every other cut in this story, that one was never seen again. Number 2. The test screening. In late January 1933, King Kong was previewed for a test audience, the screening most histories place in San Bernardino, California. The film they watched ran longer than the film the world knows. After Kong shakes the sailors from the log bridge, a moment that survives in every print, the story continued at the bottom of the ravine. Willis O'Brien had animated the pit as a living ecosystem. An enormous spider, a crab the size of a man, a lizard climbing a vine toward a survivor, an octopus-like creature dragging itself out of the water. The fallen sailors, injured but alive, are hunted through the mud and eaten. Accounts of what happened in that cinema differ, and this matters. The version repeated for decades that audience members screamed, fled the theater, or fainted in the aisles is legend, reported second and third hand, and never reliably confirmed. What is confirmed is what the film's producer said himself. Marion C. Cooper's stated reason for what he did next was not panic in the seats, it was pacing. The sequence, he reportedly said, stopped the picture in its tracks. Number 3. The scene vanishes. Whatever combination of pacing and panic drove the decision, the outcome is not in dispute. Cooper ordered the spider pit sequence removed, and it never appeared in any released version of King Kong. Not in the New York premiere prints in March 1933, not in the general release, not in any re-release, in any country, in any decade since. And here is the part that separates this from every other cutscene this channel has covered. The removed footage was not stored. There is no record of the sequence being archived, returned to the effects department, or preserved in any studio vault. In 1933, cut footage had no value, no home video, no special editions, no reason to keep it. The standard practice was disposal, and every serious history of the film concludes that this is almost certainly what happened. The most talked about deleted scene in Hollywood history probably went into the incinerator within weeks of being shot, and nobody involved thought it worth recording. All that survived were photographs, production stills taken on the set, and the memories of the men who made it. The film became immortal. The scene became a ghost. Number 4. 90 years of searching. The search for the spider pit footage has now lasted longer than most of the people searching for it have been alive. Film historians checked RKO's records as the studio's library changed hands. Collectors chased rumors of private prints. Archives in the United States, Europe, and Asia have been asked repeatedly to check their unlabeled nitrate holdings. Nothing has ever surfaced, not a frame, not a fragment, not a foreign print with the sequence intact. In 2005, Peter Jackson, then finishing his own King Kong remake, did the only thing left to do. With his effects team at Weta, he rebuilt the sequence shot by shot, using the surviving stills, the original script, and O'Brien's animation style on miniature sets built the 1933 way. The result, released as a documentary piece alongside his film, is a loving, meticulous act of reconstruction. It is also, and Jackson himself has always been explicit about this, not the lost footage. It is a modern film crew's best guess at what the lost footage looked like. Keep that distinction in mind. Later in this video, it becomes important. Number 5. The censors arrive. The spider pit was the scene King Kong lost before release. The censors came for the rest afterward. The 1933 original was a pre-code film made in the brief window before Hollywood's production code was strictly enforced, and it played rough. Kong chews a Skull Island villager between his teeth. He drops a New York woman from a hotel window, having realized she is not the woman he wants. He tramples villagers into the mud. And in the film's strangest, most intimate moment, he holds Ann Darrow in his palm and peels away her clothes, piece by piece, sniffing his fingers with what the animators played as curiosity. When the film was reissued in 1938 with the code now fully enforced, those moments were cut. The chewing, the falling woman, the trampling, the undressing, gone. And unlike the spider pit, these cuts were repeated around the world, with different countries trimming different shots until the film that circulated for a generation was measurably tamer than the film 1933 audiences had actually seen. For roughly 3 decades, the full King Kong effectively did not exist anywhere in public view. Number 6. The missing pieces come back. For those 3 decades, the censored shots were assumed by many to be as lost as the spider pit. They were not. The difference is that the censored material had been distributed. It existed in early prints that had gone out into the world before 1938, and film does not always come back when it is recalled. Around 1970, the missing shots were recovered. The commonly told version is that they were found in a surviving uncut print, often said to have been located in Philadelphia, and in 1971, a restored version returned the censored moments to circulation for the first time in a generation. We hedge the details of the discovery because the accounts vary in the telling, but the outcome is beyond dispute. The version of King Kong you can watch today, with the chewing and the falling woman and the undressing intact, is the restored pre-code film, and audiences between 1938 and the early 1970s never saw it, which sets up the neat, strange asymmetry at the heart of this story. The scenes the censors cut all came back because copies had escaped into the world. The scene the filmmaker himself cut never came back at all because it never escaped. Censorship, it turns out, is more survivable than a producer with Final Cut. Number 7. The 18-inch monster. The monster at the center of all this stood roughly 18 inches tall. Kong was, for most of his screen time, a tabletop puppet, a jointed metal armature, padded with cotton and foam rubber, covered in rabbit fur, animated by Willis O'Brien and his team 1 frame at a time, 24 tiny adjustments for every second of film. Several models were built, and for close-ups, the studio constructed a full-scale bust of Kong's head and shoulders, operated from inside by crew members working the eyes, lips, and nostrils, plus an enormous mechanical hand for Fay Wray to sit in. What was never built was a gorilla suit. No performer played Kong in 1933, a myth that circulated for decades, occasionally encouraged by the studio's own publicity department, Which preferred a mysterious giant robot or a man in costume to the stranger truth that audiences were being terrified by 18 inches of rabbit fur? You can see the truth on screen if you know to look. In several shots, Kong's fur ripples and crawls from frame to frame. That is not wind. That is the fingerprints of the animators, pressed into the fur between every exposure, the touch of human hands, visible 90 years later on every second of the monster's life. Number 8. The Scream Sessions. Fay Wray spent much of 1932 being terrified by things that were not there. The creature she reacts to in the jungle scenes was added months later. On set, she was often looking at a rehearsal pole, a technician's raised hand, or nothing at all. While Shotzak described what would eventually be pursuing her, her screams, the most famous screams in film history, were largely manufactured afterwards in dedicated recording sessions. By her own later accounts, she was brought into a soundstage and asked to scream again and again in different registers and lengths, building a library of terror that the editors then laid across the finished film wherever Kong appeared. She reportedly lost her voice in the process. Wray spent the rest of her long life gracefully tethered to those sessions. She titled her autobiography "On the Other Hand," a wink at the giant mechanical palm she had sat in, and when she died in 2004, the lights of the Empire State Building were dimmed in her honor. The woman and the building, joined by a puppet neither of them ever actually met, in a scene the whole world remembers. Number 9. The two biggest theaters in the world. King Kong's New York opening in March 1933 was, by the standards of any era, absurdly outsized. The film opened simultaneously at Radio City Music Hall and the RKO Roxy across the street, the two largest theaters in the world at the time, with a combined capacity reported at around 10,000 seats and, by the accounts of the day, filled them, show after show, in the very week the United States banking system was shutting its doors. President Roosevelt declared the national bank holiday that same month. Audiences whose banks were locked reportedly queued anyway. And there is a fine irony in where the film's climax takes place. The Empire State Building, completed 2 years earlier, was in 1933, a monument standing more than half empty, nicknamed the Empty State Building in the press, a skyscraper the Depression had made a folly. King Kong, in a sense, gave the building its story. The tower that commerce could not fill was filled instead by a myth, and the two have been inseparable for 90 years, to the point that the building itself now marks the film as part of its own official history. Number 10. What the photographs show. So what did the lost scene actually look like? The honest answer is, we know more than you might expect and less than the internet claims. The surviving production stills a small set of photographs taken on the ravine floor set show O'Brien's creatures in position, the great spider crouched among the rocks, the lizard on its vine, the crab, the tentacled thing at the waterline. The shooting script describes the action beat by beat, and the men who made the film spoke about the sequence in interviews for decades afterwards. With the animators' pride of people who knew they had built something extraordinary, from those three sources, stills, script, and testimony, historians have assembled a reasonably confident picture of the sequence's content and length. What no source can supply is the thing itself, O'Brien's animation, the timing, the movement, the life. That is the part that was thrown away, and it is the part no reconstruction, however loving, can actually recover. A still photograph of a stop-motion scene is a contradiction in terms. The entire art was the motion. What survives is the set of a performance that no longer exists. Number 11. The discoveries that never were. Every few years, the spider pit is found. It was found in a private collection in the 1970s. It was found in a foreign archive in the 1990s. It has been found, according to the internet, in mislabeled canisters, in estate sales, in the vaults of collectors who will reveal it any day now. None of it has ever been true. No claimed discovery of the spider pit footage has ever produced a single verifiable frame, and several of the most widely viewed lost spider pit scene videos online are On inspection, Peter Jackson's 2005 reconstruction, stripped of its labels and re-uploaded as the real thing, sometimes with artificial film damage added to age it. There are also entirely fabricated versions now circulating, assembled from modern software, presented as leaked archive material. So here is this channel's standing position, stated plainly. If the spider pit footage is ever genuinely found, it will be one of the great film preservation stories of the century. It will be authenticated publicly by archivists, and we will happily make that video. Until then, every version of it you encounter online is a reconstruction, a tribute, or a fake. The real thing has been missing since 1933. That is not a mystery being hidden from you. It is almost certainly simply gone. The missing frame behind King Kong is the purest example this channel has ever covered, because nothing about it is hidden. There is no vault, no conspiracy, no studio sitting on a secret. A filmmaker cut a scene from his own picture in 1933, at a moment in history when cut film was worthless, and the ordinary machinery of a Hollywood studio almost certainly destroyed it within weeks. Everything since the 90 years of searching, the rumors, the fake discoveries, the shot-by-shot reconstruction by one of the most successful directors alive, is the sound of the world refusing to accept how casually these things were once thrown away. And that is the real story of this film. The censored shots came back because prints had escaped into the world before the censors moved. The spider pit never came back because it never escaped at all. One decision by one producer, made for pacing, outlasted every censor board on Earth. The monster itself was 18 inches of rabbit fur, animated by hand, its creator's fingerprints still crawling visibly across its shoulders. The screams were recorded in a room weeks later by a woman looking at nothing, and the most famous lost scene in the history of cinema survives only as a handful of photographs of a set where something extraordinary happened, 24 frames at a time, for an audience of technicians and, once, for a single cinema in San Bernardino. If this is the kind of film history you want more of, the versions cut, the scenes that vanished, the endings audiences never saw, subscribe to The Missing Frame. There is always another frame missing.